Hello and thanks for joining us for today's video. Just before we start, we want to tell you that we'll be releasing short videos daily. You can watch them here on YouTube, but we'll also be posting them on TikTok and Instagram. Links to both our Instagram account and TikTok account are in the description box. Thank you so much for your time. Without any further delay, here's this week's video. Number 3. Angelo Hayes. In 1937, French 19-year-old Angelo Hayes was an avid motorcycle rider. He was known to constantly ride his motorcycle around town. However, he was also known for not wearing his helmet. On September 1st, 1937, Hayes was speeding his motorcycle around his hometown, Saint-Quentin-de-Chalais. Saint-Quentin-de-Chalais is just over 50 miles from Bordeaux, France. While speeding, Hayes lost control while trying to turn. His motorcycle crashed into a wall, throwing him headfirst into the wall. Paramedics arrived on the scene and could not find a pulse. Hayes was pronounced dead. Doctors recommended his parents not see his body, as his face was so disfigured it could upset them. He was prepared for burial, and they had a closed casket funeral. 3 days later, Hayes was buried. In a weird coincidence, Hayes' father took out a $200,000 life insurance policy on him just 2 weeks earlier. An investigation was launched because the insurance company thought it was suspicious that his father took out a life insurance policy and 2 weeks later his son died. For the parents to receive the money, a full autopsy was ordered because one wasn't performed before his death. Investigators ordered an examination of the body. When they opened the casket, they were shocked. Hayes' body was still warm. He then started to move. They took him back to the hospitals, and doctors confirmed he was still alive. He received proper medical attention, and miraculously, he made a full recovery. It is believed that after hitting the wall in his motorcycle crash, his body went into a deep coma and needed very little oxygen. Because his face was so disfigured and pulse was undetected, they couldn't tell he was breathing. He survived being buried for 2 days because he needed less oxygen, and the casket had enough at the time of his burial. Luckily for him, his father took out the life insurance policy 2 weeks before the accident, which got him exhumed and saved his life. After his 2 brushes with death, Hayes invented a special casket for cases like his where people might be buried alive. In the casket, he added alarm bells, lights, a toilet with toilet paper, and compartments that hold food. All things needed to help survive until a person gets dug up. To prove his invention worked, he was buried alive for a second time. He survived for another 2 days being buried alive. Hayes became somewhat of a French celebrity after that. Angelo Hayes went on to live a long life after being buried alive. He passed away on January 12, 2008, at the age of 90. Number 2. Essie Dunar. Born in 1888 in the rural town of Blackville, South Carolina, Essie was known in her community as a quiet, kind-hearted woman. Her life was not easy. From an early age, she struggled with epilepsy, a condition that was poorly understood and often stigmatized at the time. In the summer of 1915, when Essie was just 27 years old, she experienced a particularly severe epileptic seizure. With limited medical knowledge and resources, the local doctor examined her and, seeing no signs of life, declared her dead. The news spread quickly throughout the small town. Her grieving relatives and neighbors began making funeral arrangements almost immediately. In accordance with customs of the time, her burial was scheduled for the very next day. On the morning of her funeral, a modest crowd gathered at the church to pay their respects. The service was somber, with loved ones mourning the sudden and tragic loss of a young woman who had already endured so much. After the service, Essie's body was taken to the local cemetery for burial. Just after the coffin was buried in the ground and the final prayers were being spoken, Essie's sister, who lived in another town, arrived at the cemetery. She was desperately hoping to see her sister one last time. Moved by grief, the mourners decided to grant her her wish. They dug Essie out of the burial plot with great care and lifted the coffin back out of the grave. The lid was opened. To everyone's astonishment, Essie sat up and smiled. Some members of the crowd, in disbelief and fear, ran away. Some screamed that she was a ghost. Others dropped to their knees in shock. But there she was, alive, breathing, and very much aware. Essie had been buried alive, and by an extraordinary twist of fate, had awakened at the precise moment she was about to be consigned to the earth. Her apparent resurrection quickly became the talk of the town and spread throughout the region. Though many were relieved that she had survived, others viewed her return with superstitious suspicion. Despite the bizarre circumstances of her return, Essie resumed her life in Blackville. She continued to live quietly, always under the shadow of her unusual experience. Some people avoided her, whispering stories of witchcraft or divine intervention. But many others saw her as a symbol of resilience and the mysterious forces of life. Essie Dunar lived for another 47 years after her premature burial. She passed away for the final time in 1962 at the age of 74. By then, her story had become part of American folklore, a tale repeated in newspapers, journals, and eventually books about strange but true events. Number 1. Barbara Markle. Barbara Markle's story is one of the most harrowing and dramatic tales of survival in American true crime history. Born in 1948, Barbara Jane Markle was the daughter of Robert Markle, a wealthy land developer from Coral Gables, Florida. Robert was the co-founder of the Deltona Corporation, a major home-building company in the area. Barbara had an older brother. At the age of 20, Barbara was a sociology major at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. Bright, poised, and well-liked, she had a promising future ahead of her. In 1968, she was preparing for her final exams, and she contracted a mild case of the Hong Kong flu. The Hong Kong flu was an influenza pandemic that occurred between 1968 and 1970. The flu had spread throughout the campus in early December. Her mother, Jane, traveled to Atlanta to care for her and then to take her back to Florida for the Christmas break. The night before they were to leave, they checked into a local motel so Barbara could rest. On the morning of December 17, 1968, the unimaginable happened. At 4 a.m., a knock on their motel door startled them. A man claiming to be a police officer said that Barbara's boyfriend, Stuart Hunt Woodward, had been in a car accident. Trusting his badge, the women opened the door. What followed was a terrifying turn of events. The man and a woman accomplice, disguised as a man, forced their way inside. Barbara was bound, drugged with chloroform, and abducted at gunpoint. Her mother was left tied up in the room. Barbara's captors were Gary Stephen Christ, an ex-convict and prison escapee, and Ruth Eisman Shear, a graduate student with a background in psychology. Their plan was as bizarre as it was horrifying. They intended to bury Barbara alive inside a homemade box and hold her for ransom. The box was a coffin-like fiberglass container buried in a remote area of Georgia. It was equipped with a ventilation system, a battery-operated fan, a small light, and some food and water laced with sedatives. Despite these provisions, it was a claustrophobic and terrifying prison. Once Barbara was sealed inside, she had no way of knowing if or when she would be found. She could hear the dirt being shoveled over her, and then silence. For more than 3 days, Barbara lay buried underground in absolute darkness, clinging to life. The kidnappers had demanded a $500,000 ransom, a sum which her father was prepared to pay. $500,000 is just over $4.6 million in 2025. Meanwhile, the FBI launched one of the largest manhunts in U.S. history. Barbara's poise and endurance during those agonizing hours were extraordinary. She remained calm, rationed her supplies, and believed she would survive. A ransom drop was set up, but then it was messed up by two unaware police officers who drove by the drop site. The kidnappers ran, but the FBI discovered their abandoned car. The car was registered to a man named George Deacon. In the abandoned car was a picture of a man with a police hat on. The FBI set up another ransom drop, and the second one was successful. However, they did not get a response on where to find Barbara. With the only lead they had, they investigated the car's owner, George Deacon. They discovered he worked at the University of Miami. He built ventilation boxes for a living. Deacon's boss told the FBI that Deacon was known to hang out with Eisman Shear, who was also a University of Miami employee. While they were investigating in Miami, a Georgia man called the FBI and claimed he found odd paperwork in a small trailer they had just purchased. One piece of paperwork was addressed to Deacon and another to Gary Christ. When they ran fingerprints found in the car, they discovered they matched fingerprints from Chris's file. They discovered that Chris and Deacon were the same person. Chris had escaped from a California prison 2 years earlier. On December 20th, 1968, Chris phoned the FBI and gave them the rough location for where Barbara was. Agents located the buried box in a pine grove near Norcross, Georgia. With shovels and bare hands, they dug frantically. Finally, they reached the box and pried it open. Barbara, disoriented but alive, looked up and smiled. Her first words were, quote, "You found me," unquote. Barbara was taken to the hospital and quickly recovered. Chris was arrested later that night when it tipped sent Florida police searching for him. They discovered him in the Florida swamps. Eisman Shear was arrested on March 15, 1969, in Norman, Oklahoma. She was discovered when applying for a job at an area hospital. The hospital took her fingerprints as a background check, and the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation had her arrested in connection with the kidnapping. The nation was gripped by the story. Barbara's remarkable courage under extreme stress was widely praised, and she became a reluctant national figure of survival. Gary Christ was convicted and sentenced to life in prison, but was controversially paroled in 1979. Ruth Eisman Shear, the first woman on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list, was captured after 79 days on the run and was sentenced to 7 years of prison. However, she served 4 years, then she was deported back to Honduras. Barbara Markle went on to live a quiet life, largely avoiding the public eye. She married Stuart Woodward, her college sweetheart, and raised a family. In 1971, she co-authored a book about her ordeal, titled 83 Hours Till Dawn, recounting the terrifying details of her captivity and rescue. Barbara's story remains one of the most compelling tales of human endurance and the power of hope. Unfortunately, Chris's criminal story doesn't end in 1979. Chris was somehow pardoned of the crime so he could attend medical school. He practiced medicine in Indiana. In 2003, his medical license was revoked for lying about disciplinary action, which he received in his residency. 3 years later, in March 2006, he was arrested once again. He was on a sailboat off the coast of Alabama with 31 pounds of cocaine and 4 undocumented people. The cocaine was worth about $1 million at the time. Chris was sentenced to 5 years and 5 months of prison. He was released in November 2010. In August 2012, he was sent back to prison for 40 months for parole violation. Chris left the country without permission and sailed to Cuba and South America. He was released in July 2015. Since then, there have been no reports of him committing a crime. Thank you so much for watching today's video. If you enjoyed it, we'd really appreciate it if you subscribed. Also, don't forget to watch our shorts on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. Once again, thank you for watching.